It's Thursday, and you know what that means. Well, actually, today it means two different things. One, my name is Simon from WhatCulture. Thank you very much for joining me, and we are about to up those downs from the latest episode of AEW Dynamite. But we also need to sit down and have a conversation. I thought very kindly, I introduced Retro Ups and Downs after being asked many times to introduce Retro Ups and Downs, so we could just have a bit of fun. And do you know what has been voted in this week? The Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view, widely regarded as the worst pay-per-view ever that has zero redeemable features. In fact, it's so crap, you can just go and watch it on YouTube for free because everybody associated with it doesn't give a hoot. So we will be doing that tomorrow around about 2 p.m. GMT. I don't know how I'm going to be able to cope with this, but now the frown turns upside down, which means it becomes a smile. And we do, of course, up those downs to the latest edition of All Elite Wrestling's Dynamite. New Year's Smash Part 2 started with Eddie Kingston telling us that he is going to beat up Pac so badly, he's gonna send him home. I don't know why this tickled me as much as it did, but it did. I enjoyed it. It was Eddie Kingston versus Pac, and let's get it up. And clearly it lit some kind of fire under the Englishman, because basically the first thing he did was knock Eddie out the ring and then do one of those crazy, beautiful diving splashes over the top rope that you just watch and think, man, everything's going to be all right in this world. If somebody can do something as pretty as that, what do we have to worry about? Snakes, but nothing else. Pac was absolutely owning him as well before he then found himself on the outside. And do you know what the bunny did? She took her nails and dug them into Pac's eyes. Just imagine that conversation. Imagine that backstage. What do I do if I do get a chance to attack when the referee isn't looking? Well, I think you should take your fingers and stick them so far into his watching devices that maybe he can never see again. There's a lot of crazy people on the roster. Eddie then carried this idea on because he knew that Pac had a bad neck, so he focused all of his attention there. And then these two had like a chop-punch battle, which sounded like it absolutely sucked. And then there was this really great bit when Pac went for a superplex off the top. He thought he was going to win. Eddie Kingston got up and just whammed him with a lariat. That was a good sequence. Kingston then went to hit DDT afterwards, but all of a sudden Pac was like, oh man, I'm in trouble here. So he smashed him with a running drop kick, hit the Black Arrow, and he got the 1, 2, 3. And he is so mad at Eddie that afterwards he locked in the Brutalizer, which of course brought in the Butcher and the Blade. They didn't like seeing their friend in pain. Somebody was always going to come out and make the save, and it was Lance Archer. And if you listened really carefully, you could hear all the roofs and all the ceilings in the building going, oh my gosh, please don't come over here. And of course, it scared the meat salesman and the Sword to such a degree, they ran off. And then Pac and Lance kind of had a bit of a verbal battle. So I don't really know what's going to happen there. Well, no, I do. Either they're going to have a match or they're going to become friends. It's not like they're going to skip down to a park and have a picnic. But all of this was a very fun way to start this week's episode of AEW. I think Miro may then have had his best Dynamite offering to date. He was taking on Chuck Taylor with the stipulation that if Miro beat him, Chuck would have to become his young boy, he'd have to become his butler, he'd have to become his servant. And because this was professional wrestling, of course he didn't win, of course he's gonna have to do that. Yeah, don't do a bait and switch. Miro posed at the bell, so Taylor obviously used this opportunity to attack him. And while he was throwing on the outside and getting a few licks in, really this was about painting Miro as a monster. Like, you can keep attacking him and you can keep doing this and you can keep doing that, but it's just like bullets hitting off metal. Eventually, he is going to own you. Now, there was a little bit of a distraction when Kip Sabian, who was at ringside, just started beating up Orange Cassidy, and Chuck Taylor couldn't believe this. How could anyone be in a violent confrontation on a wrestling show? And then he did run into a big boot from Miro, who then locked in the game over. Chuck Taylor had to tap out, and honestly, I don't think this went 4 minutes. It is the way that it had to go, though. It kind of moved Miro up the ladder a little bit, and now we're gonna have to see Chuck Taylor as his second, or as his bitch. That's what they say on WWE, you bitch, because they always run out of those words. But I do believe that if they do this right, it should be very entertaining, and I believe they will absolutely get it right. It is bad times for Matt Hardy and Private Party, though. Shucks, because they have now realized that the contract they signed last week is a bunch of baloney. Matt Hardy is taking way too much money, and when they approached him, Matt was like, well, I've just taught you a great lesson. So he didn't agree to take less money, he just said, well, it sucks to be you, and now these three still have to be friends. So essentially the idea here is that Matt Hardy is meant to be teaching them through examples, but obviously he is just being a money-grabbing fiend. But this does present quite an interesting scenario. Like, does Matt Hardy get another partner and eventually we have that tag team match? Do we have a bunch of singles bouts? Or do we do the crazy thing of breaking up Private Party? I mean, we won't do that because AEW is smart and really those two guys should be together forever. But I like all of this, and as usual, I'm enjoying the evolution of Matt Hardy's character. He rarely gets it wrong. The Inner Circle were then out to give their New Year's resolutions, and it won me over straight away because Chris Jericho got a microphone and he said, well, what does everybody want? And Jake Hager just jumped in like a big buffoon and went, championships, yeah. If you're going to give me that kind of goofiness straight away, you're always going to get it up. MJF carried this on by saying that he wanted to make sure he kept investing time into the other relationships within the Inner Circle, and that also he thinks fat people suck. So there's Maxwell Jacob Friedman for you. And then Ortiz reminded us he wants to get good at cooking. I very much appreciate how none of these guys take themselves seriously. It wasn't all peaches and cream though, because Le Champion then said, well, you know what mine is? I want to team up with MJF and I want to win the AEW tag team titles. And Santana didn't like this at all, because he was like, Chris, you brought me and Ortiz into this because we are the official tag team of the Inner Circle, and now you're trying to win the belts? Colour me offended. It was all good though, because Sammy Guevara then finally popped up and said, hey, I know what's going on here. Chris Jericho is a tag team slut. A TTS. Maxwell was having none of this and tried to calm everything down, but bad things were coming, people, courtesy of Sammy. But once again, our leader had an answer. Given that we do have 6 people right here, why don't we have a triple threat tag team match on next week's episode of Dynamite, and whoever wins can be deemed the official tag team of the Inner Circle. So it is going to be him and MJF taking on Santana and Ortiz, taking on Sammy and Hagar. And of course, Sammy Guevara here missed that joke, and if you don't get it, don't worry about it either. Probably means you're just young and not old like me. And really, I can't see this going well, but I do think it's an interesting spin on what you would probably expect. Because while they're all acting like, hey, we can coexist and we can have these inner battle scraps and everything's okay, that's not what's going down at all. In fact, Sammy Guevara looks like he's about to break down and start crying, and deep down in my tum-tum, I still believe that MJF and Sammy are constructing something here, and they are going to transform it into the Inner Circle 2.0, and poor Chris Jericho is gonna be out on his ass. I like it though, and I know I do, because look at me, fantasy booking away like some kind of wrestling nerd. Little spoiler for you, I am a massive wrestling nerd, and when sometimes in the comments people go, Siren, you're such a wrestling nerd, I'm like, obviously, I'm a bit like wrestling threw up over me. Next up, we then turned the Dark Order good guys, and really, what else could we have done? Evil Uno was being interviewed, and he said from now on, every step they take will be in honor of the Exalted One, and really the first thing they need to answer is, will Hangman Adam Page, who was here too, join our group? He said that he will decide this next week when he does team up with Alex Reynolds and John Silver, and John Silver couldn't have been more excited about this. It was as if he had transported himself back a few weeks and somebody had given him Hangman Adam Page for Christmas. So we will find out more in 7 days, and all of this was just really smart. It was really good, and now every time I see these guys on my screen, it makes me feel warm and lovely, and I enjoy feeling warm and lovely. Reminds me of a sunny summer's day. We then just had the best building, reminding you of everything that had happened between Darby Allin, Team Taj and Brian Cage, and building up to our main event. It was awesome, it kicked all the ass, it let you know that the TNT Championship was a big deal, and I was ready, as you know, to plug myself in. We then started the teasing. Hold on to your hats. Because all week long, All Elite Wrestling has been saying the Elite is going to compete on Dynamite, and Kenny Omega is one of these names. So everyone else was like, okay, well, is he going to team with the Young Bucks, or is he going to team with the Good Brothers? What is going on? And if you watch BTE on YouTube as well, you will know that Matt and Nick Jackson aren't really 100% sure about what's going down, but they felt obliged to be part of it because of their pasts. And man, were they right to think that, because things went bad here. After they had done a little bit of a promo backstage, and Kenny Omega was like, look dudes, I think we should do our separate entrances because I'm absolutely in love with mine. When he had done that, and Don Callis got the microphone, he pretended and he pretended and he pretended that he was going to announce the Young Bucks, and instead he did a little bit of a swerve and said, hey ho, here's Gallows and Anderson. We then saw the World Tag Team Champions in the back, and it looked like they had just been stabbed right in the heart, and I could understand. And also a really nice touch here, Gallows and Anderson didn't come out with any Titantron, there was no music, because of course, they don't work for the company. And there's more to this too, because of course it's the first time an Impact Wrestling talent is now performing on AEW, so I was quite excited about that, and it was these three, and they were taking on Garrison, my man, how you doing bro, hope you're well, Brian Pillman Jr., and Danny Limelight. Up. The Varsity Blondes were doing alright at first too with frequent tags until Danny Limelight got in there, and I suppose he got a little bit too carried away because Gallows then just smashed him right in the face, and Kenny followed that up with a crusher. Things were about to get bad. Danny did have a great comeback which led to an even better hot tag for Brian Pillman Jr. before him and Garrison hit a blockbuster on Carl Anderson. This is when I felt my own feelings warming up, and I don't know what that means. But it really powered up Danny, who thought he had the world at his fingertips. And then he ran right into the Magic Killer. 1, 2, 3. The Good Brothers got their win and their first victory on AEW Dynamite. Just as they were celebrating, have a guess who arrived? That's right, it was Jon Moxley. And he didn't give two flubs that he was massively outnumbered here. He just got in the ring and he tried to beat up Kenny Omega. But then, yeah, it is pro wrestling, the numbers game caught up to him. Because of that, though, the entire locker room then emptied, including the Lucha Brothers, because not only did they want to help out Jon Moxley, more importantly, they want to protect the sanctity of AEW, so our cross-promotional war is on. The Young Bucks got involved too, and they were trying to calm everybody down, but Penta and Phoenix just kicked them right in the face, and then another brawl broke out, which allowed Kenny Omega and Don Callis to scarper, and all of this is just so wonderful. Like, Kenny's mad ego is actually working and he kind of is in control, and now we have factions fighting with each other and we don't know what's going on, plus we have Hard to Kill on Saturday. It is like we're all living in an alternate dimension. But it's all good because I'm having a good time. I always like to remind everybody of this. If you watch any segment on wrestling TV and you have a good time and you were entertained, then you gotta tick that box. And talking of said audience and how you feel about segments, we got to the first ever waiting room hosted by Britt Baker on AEW Dynamite. Now, if I'd listened to what a bunch of people had messaged me, I would have come on here and gone, well, that's the worst thing I've ever seen. But I'm not gonna say that, and I'm giving it up. Now look, was it full of a bunch of terrible jokes that Rebel was laughing at like she was some kind of puppet on a string? Like, yes it was. At times, did it feel really messy? Yes it did. Were we promised an interview with Cody Rhodes that we never really got because there was so much fracas and there was a surprise from Jade Cargill? Yes there was, but here's the surprise, Batman. That was the whole point. It was meant to be absolutely shoddy because Britt Baker is a crazy egomaniac. And she's so good at it too. She's so good at it. She is such a buffoon, and poor Cody got dragged into all of this before Jay did walk out, and I do not understand the problem with her either. Sometimes it's all right just to look at someone and go, well, I can imagine why somebody would want them to be a professional wrestler on their roster. She looks like she could kick everybody's ass. So I understand she's a work in progress, but please can we give her time? And she is desperate for some kind of match against Brandy Rose, but of course she isn't here when all of a sudden Red Velvet Cake arrived to try and get some kind of revenge. Those two started kicking ass, all the other women emptied, there was yet another brawl, and then we cut to the big screen and Britt Baker was reminding us that she kicked Thunder Rosa's ass, and then we got a follow-up promo for Thunder Rosa. This was all kinds of exhausting, but I tell you, I was never bored. The absolute highlight though was that Thunder had told Britt Baker that at Beach Break in a couple of weeks, those two are gonna fight, and the dentist was like, I'm not fighting, don't be stupid. And then a graphic popped up on the big screen, and poor Britt basically had a meltdown. She even yelled at Tony Khan. She's just the best character. I don't even care. I know this wasn't for some people, but I thought it was so dumb, intentionally so, that I had a good time. She also had a very good punchline about Cody being on the Go Big Show, which is currently airing on TNT. You shouldn't do this every week because there are too many talk shows in pro wrestling, but as and when it makes sense, that is fine by me. I was then so fascinated as to what was going to happen because we had FTR taking on the Jurassic Express, but of course Luchasaurus, being the terrific dinosaur that he is, had stood away from all of this so that Marco Stunt could team with Jungle Boy instead. Now we all understand that Marco Stunt is somewhat of a controversy in professional wrestling, but my word, what a well-structured match. Because not only was this not a disappointment at all, it absolutely exceeded my expectations, and Marco Stunt especially was absolutely brilliant. Like, I enjoy him being in matches anyway, because when he was stood there against this tag team, he looked so tiny, but that's why I can't keep my eyes off him. He's offering me something different. Also, Dax and Cash just beat him up, because of course they did. He really tiny, they really big, they're a really smart tag team. They just cut off the ring and they lumped him with shots and they lumped him with boots. So yes, they were too smart, they were too big, and they were too good, but also they were just too arrogant because they allowed Marco to drop kick them right in the face. He then made the hot tag to Jungle Boy and flubbed me sideways. He came rocketing out of there like he knew there was a PS5 on the other side of the squared circle, and they are still pretty hard to get. He then teamed with Stunt to become double the person they were before. They forged their bodies together, and then Marco Stunt was diving through Jungle Boy's legs onto FTR before Jungle Boy did a moonsault. This was some terrific stuff. And you couldn't help but get into it because there was too much energy, and FTR sensed that, so do you know what they did? They just smacked them right in the face and they calmed everything down again, because that's what the former tag team champions do. They are morons though, because they then made the same mistake which allowed Jungle Boy to get another hot tag, and it freaked Harwood out to such a degree he tried to use the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, and he held the tights, but somehow this still wasn't enough. So honestly, I don't think we could have done more to underline the fact you shouldn't be ragging people just because of their size. There's always a way to make it work. And do you know how FTR eventually won too? Dirty tactics, the assholes that they are. Because at one point Marco Stunt was on the outside, Tully Blanchard, FTR's manager, was there. He hurled him into the ring post. Jungle Boy tried to stick up for his friend. He then got whammed with a lariat. Marco was then back in the ring and he got hit with the big rig. Down he went. 1, 2, 3. This was such a well put together match though. And look, if you don't like it and you think it's stupid, that's cool, man. You do you. I honestly think this was faboo. And I felt that way too when Serena Deeb took on Conte for the NWA Women's Championship. If you had seen their Road 2 special on YouTube this week, you know that AEW has gone out of their way to make this feel important, and they just had a really good wrestling match. It's getting it up. The really cool thing is that Serena Deeb continually proves that she is just such a well put together solid wrestler, but Conte gets better week after week after week. And also here, that's kind of what we were saying. Serena Deeb has all the experience in the world, but Conte is like some kind of judo expert. So anytime Serena tried to do something with her, she had some kind of judo move and she busted it out. A full Nelson into a stunner got a great near fall for the challenger, and somehow Serena was able to transform that into a stretch muffler, which, by the way, if you so care, is the winner of this week's Wrestling Moves Have the Best Names. I mean, the stretch muffler. Ty eventually got to the ropes though, which then resulted in this really good back and forth, with Conte going for the Ty KO, I think she calls it. She wasn't able to, so Serena Deeb hit the Deeb tox. You get where I'm coming here. It's just like a front slam kind of a thing. She got the 1, 2, 3. She's still your champion. Ty Conte came out the side feeling like a bigger star, and I was in awe, because how do wrestlers manage to take their own names and work it into so many moves? You should watch this though. You really should. Not only did it help the titles, but it helped both contenders. And honestly, now I'm looking at Serena Deeb as some kind of end of game boss. She feels like she's undefeatable because she's got those mechanics down. And you can take all of that and apply it to the main event too. Brian Cage, Darby Allin, TNT Championships. This was truly bonkers, and it's getting an easy up. And yes, look, this was always going to be David versus Goliath, but you don't do the super obvious just because it's super obvious, because sometimes super obvious is what makes super sense. Like, you wouldn't rewrite Romeo and Juliet and go, oh, but in the end they banged, and then both families had a great time. That doesn't have the same emotional punch. Allin came flying out the gates here too, using his quickness and dives to try and take the big man down, but that didn't work, because Brian Cage just caught him and suplexed him on the floor. Now that sounds like quite an impactful move. You have no flipping idea. Because Darby refused to back down, so he just slapped Brian Cage right around the face. So Brian grabbed him, picked him up over his head from within the ring, threw him over the top rope, and hurled him so far he went crashing through a table. Now, while we have seen these kind of bumps time and time again, I don't know how Darby Allin would have been able to control his fall here. It looked like a car crash. It busted Darby open as it was always going to, and it put Brian Cage in control, and then he was just chucking around this poor man like he was trying to kill him. And he got bored of that after a while, so just mounted him and started to punch him in his face. And for some reason at that point, my brain went, hey, you know what I'd like to see? Brian Cage versus Moose. And it's true, I would like to see it. Cage then caught Allin again and gave him an F5. But do you know what this wry little devil did? He kicked out at one, and it's those small touches that will drive a fan wild. It also really annoyed Brian Cage, because you know what it resulted in for the TNT champion? He just got powerbombed onto the ramp over the top rope, and I was a bit like JR in 1998 with somebody stop the damn match. And it doesn't matter what I say, I cannot convey to you how much Darby Allin was getting his ass whooped here. It's like he wakes up in the day and goes, how am I going to experience pain? I will do whatever I need to do to feel that most sensual of senses. Cage then decided, hey, I'm gonna do all this again, but now I'm gonna do it on the steel steps. But before that happened, Darby Allin bit his hand, eventually pushed Cage onto the steps and then climbed to the top rope and gave him the coffin drop. This looked like it sucked for everybody, including me somehow, because I went, ow, I'm a strange guy. Cage then caught Allin again, Darby then bit Brian again, and realizing that maybe he needs a plan B, he got his belt and he tied it around Brian Cage's shoes like this was Sylvester and Tweety Pie. It kind of did make Brian go, oh, I don't know what's going on. Allin hit him with a code red for the closest near fall ever. This was a spectacular match. Ricky Starks then panicked and just knocked Darby Allin off the top rope, which is when the lights went out, Sting was there, he finally did something, and he smacked Ricky with the bat and he sold it like he'd been shot with a gun. And I know this wasn't much, but you could just tell this whole thing was designed for a huge crowd, and it sucks that we didn't have one, but it was so good. I'm not gonna lie, I was losing my mind a little bit. I had invested. Cage was then gonna do some kind of crazy thing off the top rope, but do you know what Darby Allin did? Do you know what he did? He hit him with that crucifix bomb pin thing. He got the 1, 2, 3, and now let's get in our DeLorean. Let's travel back in time. Why did this feud with Taz start to begin with? Because Darby Allin screwed that up when he was taking on Cody Rhodes. Taz had found him and said, look, 2 things, do you love the color orange? Also 2, I can teach you that move properly. Darby turned him down, but as it turned out, he learned it anyway, and he's still your TNT champion. Are you kidding me? That is some good stuff. Snow then fell from the sky as Darby and his dad Sting stood there together, and that was a pretty powerful moment. And given that this was technically just a random episode of Dynamite with a cool name, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Now, before we do wrap up this week's episode, I do have to be fair to everything. Somebody got in touch with me and said, Simon, do you think it's weird that most Dynamite matches end in a similar fashion? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, let's go through tonight's episode. Miro won because Kip Sabian did something on the outside. FTR won because Tully Blanchard did something on the outside. Eddie Kingston almost won because the Bunny did something on the outside. And then Ricky Starks also got involved in the main event when he did something from the outside. And I was like, you know what? You do make a very good point. But I actually think in the context of what we saw here, it was delivered well. But this is me putting it on notice. So if it does keep happening, maybe I'll even start a counter. I consider myself a fair, transparent, and honest reviewer, critic, journalist, I'm none of those things, asshole. But still, this was brilliant to watch, and it was so effortless too, it was so easy, so overall, it does get an up. And now make sure you go there in those comments below and let me know what you think too. Then like the video, share the video, and smash that subscribe button. We got a website, it's called WhatCulture.com. We got a Twitter, it's called @WhatCulture WWE. And we have more videos here, including the one tomorrow, when we'll up those downs for Heroes of Wrestling. My name is Simon for WhatCulture. Thanks for joining me as always. I will see you then.